Allow me to outline a philosophy of death. The anthropology of mankind is categorically different from the story of mankind. The anthropology of mankind is a clinical exposition of once benighted animals, adapting and surviving an environment by slowly learning to adapt their environment to assure their survival. There's endless talk of evolution impressing itself upon our lizard brains, transforming them into ape brains. The anthropoid is the product of roiling pressures, internal and external, mechanically molding, shaping, and affecting reptilian instincts into something that somehow transcends this process. In some mysterious and hitherto incomprehensible way, this unconscious proceeding yielded consciousness. The impersonal yielded personhood. There is a theoretical haze between our comprehension of these unintentional events and the intentionality of the mind. Here, in the mystery origin of human understanding, the story of mankind emerges. After all, what is a story but an exposition of change, both internal and external? The story is the coming together of mechanical processes and intentionality, the two married to one another and driven inexorably towards an end. Stories are motivated by both unintentional events and the intentions of characters that populate its setting. For this reason, the story of mankind speaks more audibly to our souls than the anthropology of mankind. It is a holistic conceptualization of the strangest animal. Stories penetrate something elemental within us, that part of us that surpasses the mechanical, but simultaneously uses the mechanical for a purpose. Purpose is that point of division between the anthropology of mankind and the story of mankind. Before the supremacy of the anthropological vision of our species, mankind conveyed its ideology and narratives. As we trace this narrative history backward in time, history becomes more mythological, and mythologies point to a purpose. A coherent picture of man cannot be drawn only with biological lines. The biography of man cannot be told meaningfully as a succession of mechanical events. There is something more extraordinary about human beings, and that ever-tugging need to understand ourselves will not be satisfied with a merely scientific recital or functional description of the oddities peculiar to us. When we look at our ancestors for insight, we see they blurred together these two competing explanations. The biological and mythological stories merge and become indistinguishable. In mythology, mankind is an emissary between worlds, essentially spiritual and essentially biological, without confusion between these two. It may be that the evolutionary hypothesis of our day provides a satisfactory recapitulation of the many billions of years the world was populated with life before human beings existed. A self-perpetuating cycle of change, adaptation, and extinction, animals melding into one another fluidly. Yet it does not quiet an ever-present misgiving. There really wasn't any history of the earth before the emergence of mankind. History is an exclusively human artifact. It is a vision of reality from which meaning can be discerned, and the search for meaning is a singularly human ambition. The appearance of mankind is the beginning of history. As such, there is no event before the dawn of man that could properly be called historical. Whatever value the lives of woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, or the Smilodon may have had, that value exists only because their lives were contemplated by men, as value is a quality understood only by the minds of men. It is possible felines and rodents have rich inner lives, but would anyone think to ask a cat or a mouse about the significance of the Roman Empire? Would anyone inquire of an aardvark or an antelope if they meditate on the aphorism, all roads lead to Rome? If a gray wolf crossed the Rubicon, would its fur stand on end as it mused about how its regality echoed the valor of Caesar? Could a wildebeest wonder at the augure's Caesarian omen, beware the Ides of March? Is there any animal besides men that can appreciate the European romance that was Rome? The very word romance is a derivative of the word Rome. It denotes an esteem for something exalted. Things like Rome and romance can only be exalted because they are esteemed great by men. Whatever is of value in the world is made valuable by the existence of men. Meaning may emanate from the stars and the cosmos and the revolution of planets around the sun, but that meaning is apprehended solely by the human creature. All of creation sings, but man is the only animal that can hum along with the tune. The clockwork elegance of forces in the universe can only be appreciated by the one form of life capable of building a clockwork. Men perceive grace and elegance in creation because we are the only beings who can perceive things as being graceful or elegant. The paucity of the anthropological account is transparent, but that paucity belies its ascendance. The evaporation of mythology from our understanding of humanity has diluted our understanding of humanity. And one has the premonition that is why it is preeminent. In the past, freedom was understood to be the realization of a person's true nature by their orientation to the good. The good was uniquely perceived by people, and so they had a natural disposition towards it and a sobering responsibility to it. But if the anthropological account of humanity is the only true explanation of our existence, then the good as such is merely a fancy born from the preferences of a reasoning animal, perhaps, but not an essentially spiritual animal. For if the good exists beyond fancy, if it is not merely a preference or a projection, then there really is a spiritual dimension to reality, and thus a spiritual dimension to man, because he alone discerns that reality. If man is liberated from the spiritual dimension of reality, then he is concurrently liberated from the spiritual dimension of his nature. The animal can be free. As an animal is merely a sensual being, men have the justification to enjoy a wholly sensual life. It may be no better than the best life of a beast, but in this model, man is at best an especially gifted beast. We now live in an era of dubious optimism. It's as if all of humanity has broken out in exultant choir. There is no appetite we cannot satiate, no lust we cannot satisfy. If there is no supernal good to which the will is pointed, then the will can conceive and pursue whatever ends it imagines. It may be nothing more than nihilism, but it is the sublimest of all nihilisms. At last we can enjoy the ecstasy of pleasures, of a frenzied orgy of indulgences, and a rhapsody of bodily experiences that will mean... And here another chorus of voice bleeds into the music, diminishing what should be a joyous melody. What will it mean exactly? Does it mean anything? Well, we suppose not, but pleasure is an end in itself, isn't it? Do we seek out pleasure for the sake of something else? To replace something else? Best not to ask any more questions, lest we begin to contemplate the final void. Pleasure is what we deserve. Maybe it's all we deserve. An atmosphere of cognitive dissonance envelops the world. A putrid air of denial billows to the firmament. This necrotic smog of self-deception wafts in malodorous waves. It perforates the membrane of our cloisters, respires in our nostrils, and agitates a wretch. The foul smell of death hangs over the corybantic jubilee of our bestial liberation. Whatever wild and hysterical pleasures we induce in ourselves from the unleashing of our id immediately fades from our memory. In the bitter dissatisfaction that succeeds the orgasmic bliss, that rapture succumbs to la petite morte. We see with horrifying clarity that everything that comes into being also passes away. And all we're aspiring to possess is impermanent. Everything decays. Even the sublimest nihilism is a creed of pessimism. Since the anthropology of mankind is not a proper story of mankind, it cannot imbue the lives we lead with meaning. If our lives do not have meaning, then our deaths cannot be beautiful. In the twilight of our lives, we cannot look our loved ones in the eyes and whisper, "I fought the good fight. I ran the good race. I kept the faith." Will we instead, in that awesome moment of annihilation, recount the succession of sexual climaxes that constituted our lives? Or in the seconds before the onset of our cellular disintegration, grasp, clutch, and scream in terror, hopelessly weeping because there will never be another? By abandoning the story of mankind in favor of the anthropology of mankind, a plain and precious truth has been lost. A good story is not merely a tale of a character's triumph or failure in one of many moments of triumph or failure in his or her life. A good story focuses on that triumph or failure in a character's life that defines forever who they are and how they should be remembered. A good story is a requiem. Would Hamlet have been a memorable play if the story of Hamlet focused on his boyhood in Denmark, frittering away his time with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, rather than examining his inner struggle about avenging his father's death? Could the Divine Comedy truly be described as comical if it ended in Florence when Dante first encountered Beatrice, instead of beginning in the darkened wood of his own personal hell long after his death? Would Achilles be called heroic by the readers of the Iliad if the story ended before he redressed how Hector slew Patroclus? The story of mankind is not motivated by superstition. It is not an explanation of why the sun moves across the sky or how the tide rises and falls. It really isn't a hypothesis of how the world is supported atop a tortoise's shell. It is in reality a philosophy of death. And teaching us how to live our lives, the story of mankind teaches us how to die. We must be temperate, strive for self-mastery, and conquer our pride during our lives so that we may die with dignity. A mechanist may ask with a sneer, what even is dignity? And perhaps the question is unanswerable. There are some things so brute and elemental that an explanation for their origins is impossible to set forth. It may be the best answer the average man can give is that it is ineffable. Nevertheless, he perceives something special in man, and not just man generally, but in individual men. However inexplicable this perception may be, that perception is unshakable. The man is tethered to that inkling because somehow he apprehends it. There is a form enlivening the creature, and in some indescribable way, that form enlivens him too. An abattoir may be a fitting place for a bull to die, but if a good man were to die in an abattoir for the same reason as the bull, it would elicit a gasp. Would we not see in a moment of undiluted horror that that man was robbed of a gift that could never have been taken from the bull? Could we suppress the intuition that the man possessed a quality that transcended the muscly sinews of his body, and that quality was violently severed from him at the moment of his death? We would cry out for justice. We would clamor for an accounting. We wouldn't be bothered by the mechanists insouciantly asking, what even is justice? And from where did this concept of accounting emerge? It is fitting for a bull to die for our sustenance, but for a man to die for so base a reason is an unfathomable tragedy, a crime against humanity. And that is because, unlike the bull, the man's life is about something. Imagine the throngs of people that would gather to mourn this man's life. They would recount stories, commemorate his greatest achievements, and eulogize his noblest qualities. The man's entire history would be recounted in a poetic narrative, and its meaning would be distilled. Would they ever think for even a moment that their elegy would be suitable for the bovine? No, the bovine they would eat without a second thought, but the man they would venerate. Their grief would each walk single file to the casket of the dearly departed and adorn it with wreaths. They might lay flowers during the course of his wake or place shillings on his eyes. Within an anthropological framework, these actions are incomprehensible. One can picture an anthropologist from the distant future explaining with all the knowing of an academic that the bereaved were a superstitious lot who believed the deceased would spend his eternity luxuriating in the smell of chrysanthemums. That is, of course, after paying a toll of 2 shillings to pass into the underworld. It would never occur to this poor, deluded professor that the man's burial grounds were ornamented with floral arrangements because it is beautiful. Because despite all the funerary lamentations, that beauty is a revelation of meaning, an insight that transcends the quality that was impressed upon that good man's life. For all the mourners present, that beauty is a reason to rejoice. The mechanists of our world are always searching for a physical explanation for man's metaphysical predilections. For them, a casket adorned with wreaths cannot be appreciated sentimentally. Shillings placed in a dead man's eyes could not move the mind to a spiritual plane. To their thinking, there must be some biological utility to every human action, or else it becomes incoherent. It must be caused by some spandrel in the brain or serve some instinct for survival. These apotropaic rituals have to emerge from some kind of vestigial function of our limbic system. What a mechanist cannot perceive, but every layman intuitively grasps, is that in the gravest matters of life, our metaphysical propensity is the one thing that needs no greater justification. That beauty is apparent in these acts is enough to justify our rational inclination. As all the anthropologists scrape through the dirt and mud of the earliest human civilizations, as they dig deep into the earth to discover a missing link in their chain of causal sequences, they might well be served to remember humanity's epitaph inscribed above the garden where the story of mankind began. For dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return.